projects which have had an impact in Mexico and the Mexican economy then and since. So a very important office holder, if you like, in that context. He was founder of the INEGI, which is the National Bureau of Statistics in Mexico, Secretary of the Budget, and as I said, Secretary of the Treasury in Mexico as well. He's co-chairman of the North American Forum, currently sits on the advisory board of Marvin and Palmer in Wilmington and Inditex Mexico, the Maria Molino Center in Mexico, and the University of Centro and Endeavor, also in Mexico. So we can see that we always have people here who are interesting with interesting things to say, and Pedro Aspe is one of those, and I'm very pleased to welcome him to speak to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. I met Tony Murphy 2 years ago, and when he visited Mexico, and I'm delighted to finally come here to talk a little bit about my country and some of the achievements that we have had and some of the challenges that we are facing. So, if you know, I will try to be as objective as possible, but to give you a sense of what's going on in Mexico and why there are certain things that look a lot like Ireland and some that are very, very different. I want to thank also the ambassador, Carlos. Thank you very much for insisting me in coming, and I have had a wonderful time in Ireland, and I hope that I will come back soon. Let me tell you how I arrange the presentation. I'm going to give you a perspective so that those of you that do not know much about Mexico, you will come with a certain basic idea of what are we doing, where are we placed in the economic sphere, etc. So I will start with, if you want to talk about Mexico, you have to talk about the world and especially about the US. The US is so big, and we are a neighbor south of the border with almost 3,000 kilometers, 2,000 miles of a border. Then when the US has a cold, we get pneumonia. So we have to forecast always the US. And if you want to know a good forecast about the US, don't ask the Americans, ask the Mexicans. We always study and are very, very careful about the US, because if we miss something, it could really hit us hard. Okay, so let's start with the recovery. After the disaster of the 2008 and 9 crisis, the only big bloc in the world that has recovered the original production is the US. If you look in these graphs, the US is way above the initial. It took a long time to recover, but finally it's there. And it's growing, the US is growing very well at 3%. 3% solid. And President Obama, I think that from a pure economic point of view, has made wonderful management of the economy. By the way, he inherited 11% of a fiscal deficit as respect to GDP. 11%. This year, in September, they will be below 1.3%. So all the mess that he inherited, that he didn't create, has been solved. So the US economy is growing very well and very solid. Why? Because productivity, there is a surge in productivity in manufacturers inside the US. So the big news in the US is that the US was losing competitiveness in manufacturers. Now it has become one of the best places for manufacturers. So we Mexicans, which are next door, we better increase our competitiveness, because if not, many of the manufacturers in Mexico could go back to the US. So there is a challenge to, and I will talk a little bit about that. But look on the right side, Europe and Japan. After 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, they have not recovered the initial level of output. So the US in that way is much better than Europe or the partners. Okay, BCG, Boston Consulting Group, makes a very interesting survey of the best 25 largest exporters in the world. And I brought, and there is the quote there that I will leave you, so that if you want to see it, it's called The Shifting Economics of Global Manufacturing. It was published in the fall of last year. So what it tells is a very interesting thing. Only 2 countries in the world increased their competitiveness in manufacturers in the last 5 years, from 2010 to 2014. The USA and Mexico. The ones that lost the most of competitiveness, Australia and Brazil, and countries in between, the rest, but all with negative competitiveness in manufacturing. So only 2 countries in the world from this survey show big increases in manufacturing, the US and Mexico. I think it's very relevant because some of the others have lost between 10 and 25% of competitiveness. Big difference. Okay? Okay, this is again the same from the Boston Consulting Group, again showing that Mexico and the US are the 2 countries that have increased their margins in manufacture, and that productivity growth has been very high in Mexico, and especially in manufacturers, okay? Muy bien. So let me go now directly to Mexico. The most important question that you could ask about the Mexican economy is why growth is so modest. Why Mexico grows only 2 to 3%? And I think there are 2 reasons. One is energy in Mexico. I will talk a little bit about that. And the second one is the slow recovery of the US. So, but I will say 75% of the problem of why we do not grow faster is the energy sector in Mexico, and 25% is the slow recovery of the US, but that's behind us because now the US is growing at a solid 3, so we cannot complain anymore. In fact, we should be happy to have a neighbor that grows that size and with that productivity, and that grows 3%. So look at the graph on the left. The graph of the left is the production of Pemex. If you take the last 10 years, the oil monopoly owned by the government, which is called Pemex, have been decreasing production at a pace of 7% a year, good years and bad years, coming down 7%. And people will say, well, maybe they are not investing enough. Well, look, the yellow line, and they have been investing more and more and more every year, and production keeps on falling 7%, 7%, 7%. By the way, this year, they say we will not decrease this year. I tell you, they will decrease 7% this year. They just issued the last information, and they were decreasing 5%. For the year, will be 7%. Okay, so why? Well, because the efficiency of Pemex is very, very low. People don't like me to say that, but let me put it this way. If you compare Pemex with any of the private companies, the big private companies of oil, we have between 1/4 and 1/6 of the productivity of those companies. If you compare the company with some state-owned companies like Statoil from Norway, then it's even worse. We have 1/7 of the productivity of Norway. So we do have a strong problem. And it's not new, it's coming down. The last 10 years, we are investing more and more, and the production keeps on coming down. So that's the problem. Of course, the good thing is that finally, after many years, President Peña presented to Congress and was able to maneuver in Congress, and a big change has occurred. For the first time, private investment, domestic or foreign, will be able to compete against Pemex. So and Pemex could be able to have partners and to get good technology and hopefully better management. So this is the left side. Let me go to the right side. The right side, let me see. Yes, here. If you see, this is 0. These are months. So, for instance, 60 will be 5 years, no? These are months, 5 years. So, what we want to put there is something that for us Mexicans is key. How many recessions the US has had since World War II, after World War II, and how long do they last? So, what you can see is that there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 recessions since World War II, and out of the 10 recessions, I can tell you something immediately from that graph. The original recessions in the 50s were very short, and production didn't fall much. They were very tiny little recessions. So the recession will last 18 months and GDP will fall 1%. Well, let me tell you about the last two. This is the 2001, and this is, of course, the 2008 and 9. Look what happened in the US. So, in the 2001 recession, if we go to here, it lasted 4 years, and production fell up to 2%. But the last one, the 2008 recession, production fell by 6% and lasted 72 months, 6 years, to recover the original output. So be careful with US recessions. Why? They are longer and deeper in the fall of production. So this is why I have been telling you that since output fell, and then failed to recover until 6 years, during those difficult years, Mexico was not growing much because your partner in free trade, the US, was not growing faster. Okay, let me go next. Okay, so President Peña sends the bill to Congress. Congress approves it, and we after August last year, we have finally the opening of the sector. Well, 3 months later, what happened? Oil prices collapsed. Okay, and of course people say, "Oh my God, poor Mexicans! After 75 years of a mistaken policy, finally they open and then prices collapse." Well, I tell you, yes, there is a shock. It's a big shock because our terms of trade fall, but the balance of payment is not, oil was not important in the balance of payments. Why? Because the balance of payments had been depetrolized many years ago. So the only problem is on the fiscal revenues, where 1/3 of the government intake comes from oil. So we do not have a balance of payments problem, but we do have a fiscal deficit problem because of the dependence. Okay. How do you get protection of oil prices? Well, you have hedges on the price of oil, and you will have to do some budget cuts. And that's exactly what Mexico did. The government, the Mexican Treasury, has purchased some hedges of oil for this year. So this year, the price is hedged. But you will have to start doing some cuts. Why? Because if the fall in oil prices lasts longer than 12 months, let's say 36 months, as an assumption, then you will need to start doing some cuts now for the next year. So this year you have the hedge, you don't have a problem, a fiscal problem, but the following year, with low prices, you will. That's why the Mexican government has started to do the cuts. Okay. Is anything good on this fall of prices? Yes, there is something that is not that bad, which is the following. Imagine that you worked in the monopoly in Pemex, in the ex-monopoly, because now it's open. Okay, if you have prices of $110 per barrel, will you actively seek to find partners? I don't know. At 110, the company is very wealthy. But imagine that prices collapse to half of that, from 110 to 55. Oh my God, at 55, you really have to seek partners. That's exactly the case. And that's why they are actively seeking to have partners. Why? Because with low prices, they do not have excess cash. In fact, they are constrained by cash and they will actively seek partners. Okay? Okay. So, is there, with all this scenario, is there anything to be optimistic? I think yes. I think three things. First, when the two new structural reforms, energy and telecommunications, were approved, that's really good. When we passed NAFTA 25 years ago, it was everything but energy. So now energy is in. So finally we completed the whole opening. That's one. Second, I'm going to show you the improvement in manufacturing productivity in Mexico. Is booming, the productivity and the competitiveness. I will show you. And third, of course, the impressive increase in U.S. economic growth. So it's solid, and as I was telling you before, the fiscal deficit in the U.S. is gone. They have corrected, President Obama corrected all the deficit. And now with the falling prices in gasoline, the consumers in the U.S. are getting an extra bonus of around $400 a month per family. How big is that? Well, big enough so that the families in the US can change cars. And if you take a lease on a car, you pay $200. So for the average family, they can change 1 to 2 cars, which they have not changed since 2010 because of the recession. And automobile sales in the US are high teens, 18%. See how? Yes, 18%. Why? Because finally the consumer has the extra cash to change cars and because of the fall in oil prices. Okay? Okay. Now, let us go to see how competitive the Mexican economy is in manufacturers. Okay. So the first thing I want to tell you is that if you look at the 90s, 1990, Mexico was really small, 6% of total exports to the US. The big guys were Japan and Canada with 18. China was even smaller than Mexico. What has happened since that time to today? China has been the winner from 3 to 20. Mexico more than double, but behind China. Canada starts falling and Japan almost disappeared. Okay, so that's the story. Now, look ahead. 2018, the only economy that it will keep on growing its exports to the US and gaining market share, Mexico. China is coming down, Canada is coming down. So here we will be, in the end of this decade, we'll have the largest market share of exports to the US. Let's go back now to see the competitiveness in unit labor cost. That's the only strange word, and I want to explain what's unit labor cost. So let me stop for a minute to be sure that that everybody understands what's unit labor cost. Imagine that you say, okay, I want to invest in a low wage country. So let's imagine Haiti is 1/10 of Mexican wages. So you'll say, well, that's cheap, let's go invest there. No, not so fast. Why? Because the productivity in Haiti is 1/20 of Mexico. So if the wages are 1/10, but the productivity is 1/20, the unit labor cost is double the cost of Mexico. That's why we Mexicans do not invest in Haiti. Okay, so let's compare now wages adjusted by productivity between Mexico and China. And look what happened in the year 2000. In the year 2000, when President Fox took office, China joined the World Trade Organization. And they really hit us hard. Look, they had 1/3 of the unit labor cost of Mexico. Okay, if you go on, what happened between 2000 and 2015? In 2015, the unit labor cost of China is 1/3 higher than Mexico. And you say, how could it be? And these are in dollars. How could it be? Let me explain you how could it be. First, in manufacturers, Mexican productivity grows as fast as China productivity. So the difference is not productivity. The difference is wages in dollars. And in dollars, the Chinese wages have gone to the roof. And the reason is, what is the reason? Why the Chinese, in dollars, the wages are so high? Let me try to explain this. There's only one explanation, and it had to do with a policy that the Chinese had 30 years ago. I don't know if you remember what happened demographically 30 years ago, but 30 years ago, the Chinese had the forced abortions for the one-child family. Okay, so what it happens if you do that policy 30 years later is that, of course, there are many Chinese in the bracket between 25 and 35 years. But in relative terms, there are not many. Why? Because of the one-child policy. 30 years later, it makes that in that part, there are very little, very small number in relative terms of young people. And that's exactly what happened. Look, China, who is obviously an emerging market, their demography doesn't look like India, Mexico, or Brazil, with a lot of young people. By the way, Ireland will be the same, with a lot of young people in the demographics. But China now looks, in that bracket, like an old country. It's between Japan and Spain. Why? Because of the one-child policy. They force one child only, and that 25, 30 years later makes that you don't have many young people, and wages have gone to the roof. The Communist Party in China last December just reversed that mistaken policy. But it will be with us the next 20 years. And that's the competitive edge that some countries with a good demographic like Ireland or Mexico where we have our window to compete. Because the Chinese will not have many young people of that age because of that demographic. So I will leave you this if you want to study more. But it's really like Spain. It's an old country in that bracket of young people. Okay. Okay. So coming back, that's why Mexico is competing head-to-head to China with no problem. In 2000, when their unit labor cost was one-third of Mexico, we lost 165 firms were already in Mexico and they left to go to China. 165. Well, all of them have returned. Not 164, no, 165 have returned. Why? Because exactly in that bracket, so I give you one example, Textron. Textron is the holding company of Bell helicopters. Bell helicopters were being built in Chihuahua, and they left in 1999. Just with the announcement that China was going to join the WTO, they went to China. So we lost 6,000 jobs in Chihuahua. It was terrible. They went there. Well, they're back. So I went to see that 2 years ago. I read an article that Textron was coming back to Mexico after 7 years or 9 years in China. So I said, I have to see that. So I went to Chihuahua and I asked the American guy who was building the factory, said, why are you returning? And the guy said, oh, Mr. Aspe, it's extremely expensive, the wages in China, and the productivity is lower than in Mexico. So they went there, built the factory there, and came back. And why? Because they didn't look at the demographics, the specific demographics down there. Okay. Let me go now. When I told you that when the recession hit, it really hit us hard in 2008 and 9. But in 1 year, Mexico recovered. So it was a very bad year, 2009. But in 2010, production recovered, and it was really export-led growth. This is manufacturing exports. So the first thing I want to explain to you that what's really Mexico is a middle-sized economy, totally open with 42 free trade agreements with, we have of course NAFTA, we have the second most important is the European, and the third is the Pacific with Chile, Peru, and Colombia. So we are, and then we have 30 more. We are an open economy, really competitive in manufacturers, and especially in automobiles, light planes, light helicopters, all these things, that's what we really are competitive. Look, exports. They are growing. So we are exporting in manufacturers plus industry around $1 billion a day. This year, we should be exporting $400 billion of manufacturers. That's really what we are. And look the growth. Okay, here is the graph of Mexico vehicle exports. These are millions of cars. When we did NAFTA, look at, we were exporting 300,000 cars. Nothing. Now, 3 million. 10 to 1. So we are really competitive in terms of automobiles, and that's why all the big brands are back in Mexico. Audi just announced all the engines in Puebla. Ford Motor Company announced the largest factory of V8 in Chihuahua, in Juarez. So all of these things are becoming. So Mexico is going to be, we're going to start exporting end of this decade around 5 to 6 million cars. It's amazing. But helicopters, planes, textiles, machines, all this light manufacturing, that's really what we do well. Okay? So we are the number 2 exporter to the US. This was Japan. We passed them last year. And we should overtake Canada in 2018, more or less. But we know perfectly well why, because the new investments are already announced. So we can forecast very, very well. In auto parts, we are number one. And the new investment, I had the old figure, this figure 20 billion is now 26, is 30% more. Okay. Negative things on Mexican competitiveness in manufacture. One, energy. Prices are way above US prices. They used to be together, but in the last years, the US energy has become lots more efficient than the Mexican energy, and we are 50% above US prices. Now, with the energy reform, that will be solved, but it will take time. So yes, there is a criticism here. I accept that we are more expensive than the US in energy, but with the energy reform, what we are doing is first, import from the US with very cheap oil gas prices. Second, open up to production of Mexicans and foreigners in Mexican soil to produce gas and not to import from the US. And that's exactly what is going to happen this year, as we speak. Okay. How does Mexico look in the European, if you take the European treaty, the Maastricht, which is 60% of debt to GDP here, and no more than 3% fiscal deficit. By the way, in the good quarter, there are no European countries. Chile is, and Mexico was, but we are starting to have a little bit more of a fiscal deficit because of the falling oil prices. Is this a red light? No, but it is a yellow light. We have to be careful here. Okay. Finally, look, something very interesting. Mexico has had fiscal deficits only when we have high prices of oil. When we had high prices of oil in the 80s and 90s, we overspent. Look, the fiscal deficits. Then we had from President Salinas, de la Madrid, Salinas, Fox, low prices, no deficit. And now with Calderon and Enrique Peña, high prices, fiscal deficit. So this is very interesting that no, we don't save in the good times. No, for the guys from Norway, in the good times, they save 40% of the extra price of oil. They keep it so that when you have a rainy day, you use it. Of course, we are Latins, we don't do that. Okay, so is there any other criticism that I could make on Mexico? Yes, current expenditure from the government is growing too much from the year 2000 to today. 7% of GDP is too much. So we will have to contain expenditures, but now with oil prices falling, this will occur. Okay, finally, here you see the reforms of the 90s and then the missing reforms, which are very important, and finally they have occurred. When will this take place? It will take place in the next 6 months, the big auctions, and hopefully next year the new investment will come. Let me stop here for a moment, and just before finishing, the government says that if the economy is growing around 3%, that the energy reform and telecommunication reform will give us 2 additional points of growth. Will I agree with that? Yes, but not in the first year. It will take, if everything comes okay in the auctions this year, next year we will grow 3.5, the following 4, the following 4.5, and the following 5. So we'll have a 0.5% growth per year. It will not be so sudden. Why? Because it takes a lot of time, a lot of time to start drilling in Mexico, all the abandoned fields that Pemex had. So it's going to be a very slow process. It will not be an 18-month affair. It will be a 3 to 5 year affair. It will take time. So what I will finish is saying we have growth today of around 3, but we have prospects down the road of around 5. It looks good. It looks very good. Inflation, thanks God, to the independent central bank, should be below 3, 2.5% to 3%. Very well controlled, independent, serious, professional. That's exactly what we needed and what we got. So, what are the main challenges? 2. Poverty in the south, terrible lack of the jobs are being created in the center, in the north. We need to bring more jobs to the south, and the bulk of the automobile industry, the bulk of all the manufacturers are in the center part of the country or the north. So we have a challenge there of poverty. Second, the challenge of education, where the education reform is starting and is in the middle of big trouble. We are hoping that this is carried on, but still not clear. There are big fights in between. And finally, the last big challenge is security, especially in some of the northern states. But if you want, when in the questions and answers, we can expand if you would want to talk about that. So I will finish. These are the full picture. I will leave you this with the round zero. With the Mexican Gulf, the Gulf of Mexico is evenly divided between the US and Mexico, 50-50 in nautical square miles. By the way, deep water in Mexico, there are 2 wells. In the US side, 17,000. So the mismanagement that we have had in terms of oil is huge. But anyhow, let us not criticize that. Let us correct that. And that's exactly what the government is doing. So I will finish with that. And if you want, I can take questions. Thank you very much.
Questions, comments, observations?
To the students, come on, ask questions.
Hi, I would like to hear a little bit more about the window of opportunity that this grows. You have very well described in terms of manufacturing to integrate. For an economy like the Irish economy, which is mainly based on the service sector, there's a huge amount of opportunities downstream and upstream, both in the value chain, that probably people from Ireland would like to hear about.
Sure. Let's take telecommunications reform. That will be a good example where the big problem, as you know, is the lack of domestic competition. So the telecommunications reform included 2 parts. One, big changes to enhance domestic competition and to prevent private monopolies. And the second one is the opening up to foreign investment. Both are there, and both are starting to play. So I will say digital will be the perfect case from Irish companies going into Mexico to take opportunity of telecommunications reform. That will be one. Second, agribusiness. I heard that you are very competitive. We are not. And agribusiness is an area where we need technology. We need especially technology, and that's the second area where I think is obvious and well. And then the third and fourth are already been exploited very well, which is the leases of airplanes and this thing. No, in my new life as entrepreneur, I created a low-cost carrier called Volaris. And Volaris has 55 jets. And we have 20% of market share. So I was the chairman for 10 years until we went public and I left the company. But that's an example of Irish collaboration with the leases. That already is happening. Ryanair has a partner in Mexico with Viva and they are doing very well. So that will take care. So I will concentrate, I will say digital will be the bulk of the things. Certain areas on the financial sector and agribusiness. These three areas will be the good possibilities.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
Thank you very much for a very thought-provoking presentation. I have two questions. One has to do with productivity. You mentioned it was a huge increase in the US and Mexico.
In Mexico, in manufacturers, not in agriculture, not in other areas. Yes.
Industrial productivity. What would be the factors that you would assign that have been have really pushed productivity up? Because the labor market reform was just recent. It was a very rigid labor market. So that's why wasn't productivity increased before the labor reform? And the second one has to do with the other thing you mentioned about Mexican growth being export-led. So now with this, I know it will take time and we don't know what's going to happen, it may go the same way as Doha, but the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which is being negotiated between the US and the European Union, which is a huge trade partner with the US. How is Mexico approaching that? It's been mentioned about that, observer status, some other ways that Mexico could follow the negotiations, because it's certainly, if and when it's concluded, it's going to have a huge impact on Mexico.
Okay, let me start with the first one. Why we are very competitive on manufacturers? I think three things. The most important one is the Mexican engineers. The engineering schools in Mexico are good and becoming excellent. And let me tell you, we are producing now double in per capita terms the number of engineers than the US is. So if you go to El Bajío and you see what Monterrey Tech and the universities, the local universities are doing, and it's engineering, more engineers. And the Mexican engineers are really, really good. So that will be one explanation. The second explanation is that the government has completely come out of the production of automobiles and all these things. When I was minister, 2 decades ago, I remember, it's a good story to tell. There was a company that I don't know why the Mexican government acquired called Racini. And I remember I was minister in charge of privatization, and I asked, what the hell does Racini does? And they say, well, they sell brakes for automobiles. And I say, why the government is inside, is producing brakes for cars? And it was losing like $100 million a year. So I said, well, we have to sell it, and we made an auction. Someone paid, I don't remember, $20 or $30 million. I said, oh my God, take it immediately, and let's get rid of that. Okay, I forgot the thing. The auction was won by one industrial guy who was quite clever, from the Madero family, and for me was end of the story. No, let me tell you what happened 2 years ago. 2 years ago. They invite me, they say, Mr. Aspe, I haven't heard of them for 20 years, and they say, Mr. Aspe, I would want to invite you for the 20th anniversary of the privatization of Frenos Racini. I say, oh, good. I was thinking to myself, oh my God, I'm glad they survived this company. No. Not only they survive. Let me tell you what happens when these companies go to the private sector with people with good incentives and good management. out of 100 cars that come out of Detroit, 100, 83, yes, 83 have Mexican frenos. I say, I cannot believe. So I went to visit the plant in Puebla. I remember it was a tiny little plant that they have shown me the plant only once. And now it's a huge, huge plant with 3,000 workers doing the thing. So this is exactly what has happened. When the government owns everything, the government cannot produce good brakes for cars. They shouldn't be doing that. They should take care of to have a good police and a good teachers and etc. No, and not to enter into manufacture. So I think that's really the big thing. So I will tell you, education is one. Unions, by the way, unions have changed completely. When you have a closed economy, the private sector can increase prices because they have protection. So the private sector increase. Imagine that you have a tariff like 40%, like Brazil. If you have a 40% tariff, you say, oh my God, we have a tariff, we can increase prices 40% and imports will not come in. Okay, you increase prices. But then the unions say, oh my God, these guys are having huge profits. I'm going to push. And they push and they get much better wages. In the end, what happens? What happens is that you don't remain competitive. So when you lower the tariffs, as we don't have tariffs with the US, then you have to be competitive. Then you have to sit down with union and say, look, I'm willing to pay you the increase in productivity. Way beyond that, I cannot do it. Because if I do it, I lose market share. And that's exactly what has happened. Let me tell you something interesting. In Querétaro, in El Bajío, in the centerpiece of Mexico, how many strikes have we had in the last 10 years of automobiles? None. None. The collaboration is starting to work. So, for instance, in the Bajío is GM, Honda, Mazda, Toyota, Hyundai, all these companies, they don't want strikes. They want to pay a fair thing, and the union guys are not crazy, but they know there is no protection. So if they start pushing too much, they will lose market share because the cars will become too expensive, and then it will be better to import them from Texas. Finally, on your second comment, let me tell you, the big negotiation going on right now is TPP, not the transatlantic, but the Trans-Pacific. TPP, day before yesterday, the Senate passed a vote against President Obama, but it's not the end of the story. We know from NAFTA that this takes forever. So what the Americans want to do is to obtain fast track. Why do you need fast track? Because if not, any deputy or any senator who raises his hand and says, I do not agree, will stop the bill. So it will be impossible. So the only way is to have a package, approve or disapprove, but the whole package. So that's why President Obama is asking for fast track. Yes, they lost last week, but I heard that they are coming in 3 weeks to a second vote. And then you will have to do politics, and you will have to convince 3 or 4 more senators. We Mexicans know after NAFTA how that was done, and that I think he will get fast track. I really think all the press is now very negative. I'm not that negative. President Obama is an excellent politician. I think he's going to get it. By the way, the problem is not the Republicans. The Republicans are in favor. It's his own party that Senator Warren from Massachusetts, etc., saying that free trade is very bad. Look, all the Mexican cars. And we say, yes, But look the whole picture, and the whole picture is that we have increased our exports 600% since NAFTA. Yes, but we have increased our imports 570%. So both countries have benefited a lot. But of course, politicians only want to show the thing that all exports are good and all imports are bad. But it's not so. We have benefited, both countries have benefited a lot from that. So we'll see. But I think TPP will come first. Hopefully, it will be approved, and then it will come the transatlantic. Now, what we will do? In TPP, we were not included, or in the original list. By the way, I don't know if you know much about TPP, but you should, because it's really important. TPP was created by 3 small, tiny little countries: Singapore, New Zealand, and Chile. I got news because the Chilean negotiator is my friend. The second treaty we did after NAFTA was Chile. And this guy and I will remain very good friends. When you do these tough negotiations, you really hate each other or you become friends forever. And we became friends forever. And he told me about TPP. And President Calderon, thanks God, ordered to join TPP, and we entered. So we are one of the 12 countries that are doing that. The US is saying, up to now, we are only going to do TPP and to see. So it's too early to know. I'm positive, but if you read the press the last 2 days, very negative. Okay. Yes?
You outlined a bit of the challenges you see in the education landscape in Mexico, and if there's anything, any possibilities or real opportunities in terms of advancing science and technology, education.
Yeah, the big problem in Mexico is the primary education. Primary education is not a problem of education reform, it's a problem of labor reform. So the big problem that we have in education is the lack of productivity of teachers in the primary sphere in some states, not in all. Take Aguascalientes. Aguascalientes is a small state in the center of Mexico that has the largest Nissan plant in the world, and it's all manufacturers there. They have excellent primary school education. Down there, the education in primary school, public versus a private education, is almost similar. In the rest of the country, oh my God, it's day and night. Day and night, and this is a pity. This is a pity that the education reform is not advancing faster. I hope that after doing telecommunications and energy, President Peña will come back with all his cabinet to pass the education reform. That's the big challenge. Now, at the higher level, things are improving very well. The universities are becoming lots more focused on innovation. The business schools are improving a lot. Your dean was telling me how you have done your partnerships with IPADE, which is a first-rate university and business university, and the second one with IGADE, which is Monterrey Tech, which is also as good as it gets in Mexico. So I think the students are changing very much. Before, let's say 10 years ago, if you will ask the students in college, what will you do in life? They will say, I will be in government or I will go to be an employee in the private sector. That was the choice, the two. Now there's a third, entrepreneurship. I see more entrepreneurial work like never before. We brought an NGO called Endeavor, from the US to Mexico to promote entrepreneurship. It's amazing what is happening. So all these kids that study, especially those that study engineering, the engineers, they are starting to all of them, to create companies and to start to do startups, etc. So it's happening. It's happening. This innovation, I think, is going to take place with the new generation, and this new generation needs better graduates from universities, and that's why we need the primary school reform, because a kid in Oaxaca where teachers do not teach 35% of the days of the year. That's the faults that they have in Oaxaca. So how can you educate someone when the teachers do not show up in 1/3 of the classes? But it's the union. So that's the clash. So that's tough. We haven't solved it, but I hope that after the execution takes place in energy and telecommunications, I hope that the government will go back to the education reform for a second push. Let us hope.
One last question, if it was
Yes.
overseas,
Yeah, going back to the oil prices and seeing like the negative correlation between oil prices and the fiscal deficit. We've seen that you mentioned that as long as we have there's like low oil prices, there should be like more savings, right? Is there any chance, like we've seen like the past 6 or 8 weeks, that oil prices have come up around like 50%? Is there any chance that this trend can stop happening? And if it's like, what would be the impact on the fiscal deficit or fiscal trade?
Yeah. Look, nobody knows where the prices are going. If you look at the futures market, they tell you, yes, it could be anything between 30 and 70. Well, between 30 and 70 doesn't tell you much. So really we do not know what oil prices are going to be. Let me tell you about the auctions that I explained. These auctions, let me start by the easy answer. Deep water. Deep water that in the Gulf, Mexico has 0 and the US has a lot of wells. Only the big companies go. The Texaco, Mobil, Chevron, BP, etc. These companies, if they start drilling in deep water, they will have the first barrel of oil 5 years after they start doing the works. So the current price has nothing to do with that, because you will invest today and you will have the first barrel of oil in 5 years. So what these companies do is that they have a study of long-term prices, totally independent of market prices today. Okay, so I think the auctions of these deep water, it will go okay. Then you have in Mexico something which is very strange, which is very unusual. Let me go back a little bit. In the 70s, Mexico found the largest oil field in the continent, in the Americas. It's called Cantarell. By the way, Pemex said that they discovered this well. It's not true. A guy came out in the 70s to complain against Pemex because the guy was a fisherman and he was having trouble with their fish because they had oil. So he went to complain to the Pemex regional office, and the Pemex regional office said, no, send him to hell. So the guy, 2 months later, shows up again and says, look, you are killing my fish. So they went to talk to the regional boss, and the poor guy was accused of lying because the regional guy of Pemex said, we are not doing a well there. You liar. There is no oil there. So the following day, the guy shows up with a big tank of oil and says, I'm lying. And he put it into the car of the Pemex regional guy. Well, the guy was called Mr. Cantarell, and Pemex didn't discover the field. It was discovered by the fisherman, and that's why the field is called Cantarell. Okay, there was so much oil that it was coming out until they found it, no? Finally. Okay, once we found this huge field, gave us, you're not going to believe, 3 million barrels a day at 3 feet deep. And that was the course for Mexico. Why? Because with all these guys, we found this thing, and they went, a lot of them went to the Las Hamacas, no? And they start having siestas, because it was so easy, no? So it was perfect for 10, 20 years, but all these fields start declining after 20 years, and they collapse after 35. So 1975, drawn down, and now it's coming down, 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 down. And we even sent people to study PhD in geology. The last one, Tafcona Seed Finance, 10 years ago, no, 15 years ago. So we're in deep trouble. So now, these new things are going to be abandoned wells. And these abandoned wells, why do we have so many? Oh, because when we found Cantarell, they abandoned all the other wells. So these wells have not been visited since the 70s. And these are the new wells that will be in auction, in the second auction in July. Abandoned fields. Fields that can produce a lot of oil, but were abandoned. And why were they abandoned? Because we found Cantarell. And it was so, how you call it, low-hanging fruit, no? When you can have oil at 3 feet deep, why to bother? So we have more than 7,000 wells abandoned. So I think we do not have a clue on oil prices. It could go anywhere, it could, if there is a war, they will come back to 100. If there is no war, and the Saudis keep on pumping, maybe we'll come back to 40, down again. We really don't have a clue. But I tell you something. If you have a long-term view, like many oil companies have, they will come to auction. They will. I think they will buy some of the fields, because Mexico, after all, between 1900 and 1921, during the period of the revolution, Mexico was the largest producer in the world. So look what the US has done with shale oil and shale gas. They went from 4 million barrels to 9 million barrels in 5 years. And I took my youngest son to Matamoros, and I showed him the shale oil and shale gas in the US side. And there were like 2,000 wells. And then the river, and then I said to him, now look south, corn, no, the Mexican side. I bet the Americans are taking, no, just at the border, no, all the wells. So I think now with the opening, the private sector in Mexico, where we have very good miners, they're going to start saying, oh, we can become oil men. We know how to drill. We know how to learn new technologies. And a lot of foreigners are going to come in. So we'll see. But I think that in a year from now, we'll have a lot of Mexican and foreign companies either joining with Pemex as partners or competing against the ex-monopoly. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Dr. Aspe for such an interesting and I think so showing us, certainly for me, a different perspective on Mexico that you don't generally think about, particularly in the context of oil and the opportunity more generally in that context. So thank you very much. It was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
University of Mexico for all their support in this inaugural Ireland-Mexico speaker series. We will be having more of these, so please do keep an eye out, and you're always very welcome to this market school, those of you who are visiting, and the students. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much. Enjoy it again.
It's a disaster.